Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 81 of Fracking Nightmare. Now, over the last few weeks, we've been talking with Susan Gorman-Chang, a resident of Porter Ranch. And the reason she was joining me was because of this outrageous gas leak, this methane gas leak, which had been pumping out into the atmosphere of Southern California since October 23rd. Well, about 10 days ago now, the well was announced as having been permanently capped. And we had discussed the fact that some 5,000 families had been evacuated from Porter Ranch. That left something in the region of about 2,000 who either didn't want to be evacuated or just hadn't had the opportunity. So 5,000 families, that's a very significant movement. There's probably about 20,000 people or so. Well, just 10 days after the well was shut in, SoCal, Southern California Gas, have announced that today, Thursday, the 25th of February 2016, is the deadline for families to return. Well, I should say for Southern California Gas, SoCal, to actually continue to pay for hotel accommodation. And here's the announcement. That one deadline arrived Wednesday, another one comes Thursday for Porter Ranch residents who voluntarily left their homes because of a leaking Southern California Gas Company well that spewed methane into the air above their homes for 111 days. Wednesday was the last night the company would pay for a hotel room, the reimbursement to people who relocated with a friend or family, and the last covering night of pet boarding. On Thursday, pending any last-minute extensions, those residents must check out of their hotels or other temporary housing whilst the meal allowance, mileage, pet pickup, and child transportation ends. And the article continues. So far, 2,081 households have checked out of temporary housing, the company said. People who relocated into rental homes or apartments can remain in those locations until the lease expires. The State Department of Conservation declared the leak sealed last Thursday. The leaking well in the company's Aliso Canyon storage field pumped an estimated 94,067 metric tons of methane into the air, according to the California Air Resources Board. Now, it's reported that that is the equivalent of 7 coal-fired power stations pumping out their toxins for 20 years. So not insignificant. Well, last week, for those of you who were watching, will remember that the conversation I had with Susan Gorman-Chang revolved around the potential risk of people returning to their homes before their homes had been properly cleaned. And clearly, basically, SoCal is saying, well, we capped the well, that's it, that's the end of our responsibility. But fortunately, the questions are being asked. And this is an article from Inside Climate News. And this appeared in the middle of last week. What will be the health impact of 100 plus days of exposure to California methane? And here's the comment that we were actually making last week. With little research into the chemicals involved, scientists can't pinpoint the cause of nosebleeds in households near Aliso Canyon. And of course, it was the nosebleeds and pets. In fact, pets were the first to suffer, primarily because obviously they're a lot closer to the ground. And it's the heavier than air gases that were impacting here. So pets were getting sick and dying. But then young children next to suffer with nosebleeds and rashes. And the article continues, one big unknown clouds the aftermath of the Los Angeles County methane disaster, the health effects for thousands of people living nearby who were exposed to the gas while it leaked for 3.5 months. People from 600 households near the leak at the Aliso Canyon gas storage unit reported headaches, nosebleeds, nausea, and other symptoms to county officials as thousands were evacuated from their homes. It isn't known which, if any, toxic chemicals in the natural gas may have caused the symptoms, or whether there will be long-term health ramifications, according to environmental scientists. We're dealing with a gap in the science, said Michael Jarrett, professor and chairman of the Department of Environmental Health Studies at the University of California. We just don't have a very good scientific understanding of what that means for long-term health effects. And this is exactly what we were discussing. And as I was pointing out last week, the oil and gas industry has been extremely successful in shutting down research into long-term health impacts of exposure to methane and other elements contained within natural gas. This article continues, in response to a query about the long-term health effects of the leak, SoCal, Southern California Gas, cited a January 31 report by the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, an agency it is collaborating with to address health concerns related to the leak. The report concluded the average levels of benzene and other trace chemicals that have been measured in the community are currently at or below levels seen elsewhere in the county and do not pose an increase in the risk of short-term or long-term health effects. So definitive, yet no evidence to support that, of course. Independent scientists, however, said not enough is known about the long-term effects of short-term exposures to certain compounds that were released from the gas reservoir. The potentially troublesome chemicals include benzene, a known carcinogen, hydrogen sulfide, which can affect the respiratory and cardiovascular systems, and N-hexane, a neurotoxin. So the reality is that Southern California Gas is effectively doing this, saying that's it, we've plugged the leak, and no further responsibility whatsoever. Yet, the people, the residents of Porter Ranch, are effectively now returning, probably being forced to return because maybe in some cases they haven't got the resources to continue staying in temporary accommodation. So now they are moving into a sacrifice zone. They are the guinea pigs in this area. There is no available research as to the effects of the residue that they're walking back into. Now, fortunately, the University of Southern California has picked up the gauntlet here, and this is from the University of Southern California News. The USC researchers will look at long-term health effects of Porter Ranch gas leak. Professor of Preventative Medicine says byproducts of the leak, beyond methane gas, may be a long-term threat to human health. A massive methane leak in the Los Angeles community will have long-term health consequences, the USC researchers said they intend to study. I absolutely concur. Call it a hunch. But the experiences of people all around the world, wherever this industry has established a footprint, wherever they've been exposed for any length of time to methane and its associated compounds, then we see the same symptoms. It's the nosebleeds, it's the rashes, the headaches, the nausea, and the difficulty in breathing. The USC article continues, the people who continue to live and work in the Porter Ranch area are breathing in a lot of methane gas. This can't be healthy. Right now, we don't think the methane exposure is as much an issue as some of the other contaminants and the potentially toxic chemicals that may come from byproduct reactions. What causes the nausea, headaches, eye irritation, nosebleeds, and other symptoms Porter Ranch residents are reporting? The methane makes up about 90% of natural gas. Methane and other chemicals emitted in natural gas can react in the open air environment and create other gases and chemicals, such as hydrogen sulfide. Benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, the BTEX chemicals, have also been associated with the emission and are thought to be part of the oily residues in the well and on the walls of the storage facility. Researchers at the University of Southern California are interested in investigating these chemical constituents and the long-term effects that might result from breathing in these chemicals. It's going to be very interesting to see whether SoCal actually lean on the various faculties at the University of Southern California to try to shut down this research. Sadly, my prognosis is that within 6 months, probably less, people are going to report that their pets are sick, probably maybe even dying, because the heavier elements will have bedded themselves into the carpets, the curtains, soft furnishings, into clothes that were left in closets, in bedding. So as the people go back into their properties, unless these properties have been steam cleaned from top to bottom and all the clothes have been cleaned, and even then there's no guarantee that it's going to eradicate all of the residue, then sadly I'm going to predict that we're going to see pets getting sick and dying. Children will be next, probably nosebleeds, headache, nausea, the same symptoms, the rashes. And SoCal are going to say, well, it's nothing to do with us because we have capped the well. And, well, no, the gases, it must be something else completely. Yeah, this sounds outrageous. You say, no, basically the researchers will find out what's causing it and then there will be the appropriate legal action and compensation will be paid. Well, I'm not sure that there is compensation that can compensate for potentially some of the long-term effects that continue here. Well, this is the result of a persistent methane leak over a period of 3.5 months. But here in the UK, if the UK government achieves its goal of establishing an unconventional gas industry, particularly right across the north of England, right across the Weald in the southeast of England, and then in pockets across the South Downs and across into Dorset, or Hampshire and Dorset. Well, one area of concern is the pollution caused by the increase in traffic. And this is from an article published just yesterday in The Guardian. The UK fracking traffic would increase local air pollution, finds study. The number of tankers taking water to and from drilling sites would increase hourly levels of nitrogen oxide emissions by as much as 30%. So the research found that a number of tankers taking water to and from drilling sites would increase the levels of nitrogen oxide emissions. The study by Newcastle University team, published in the Journal of Environment International on Wednesday, also said fracking traffic would increase noise levels locally and could damage roads. Well, of course, that is the experience of those people who have already been targeted by this embryonic industry, particularly people in Lancashire, in Yorkshire, and of course in Sussex, and now in Surrey. And of course, the argument is put forward, and in fact, I heard it very recently, that, look, even if there are some of these problems, then, the industry will do the right thing, the government will do the right thing, and there will be the appropriate compensation. Well, really? Because here's one example of a recent situation, this terrible tragedy of this family that were affected by cyanide gas as a result of the flooding. And this is in the London suburbs. And this young boy, Zayn Dabanggbola, he died at home during the flooding 2 years ago. And it's believed that it is the cyanide gas that leaked into the house, into his bedroom, killing Zayn and making his father seriously ill. Yet there is no rush to take any responsibility here. Consequently, the family have to pursue this through the courts, and now they have been denied legal aid. So the attitude of the industry, the attitude of the government, the attitude of the regulatory authorities is to give the corporations effectively the priority here. And it's just unfortunate that these people live in the sacrifice zones, in these areas around landfills or around the potential drilling sites. And there's no fund for them to draw on. There's not even legal aid here. So this is most likely going to be yet another whitewash. hopefully somebody will pick up the case on a pro bono basis. But do I have the confidence that the British government and the unconventional oil and gas industry will do the right thing? Do I hell? Well, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll be taking a quick look at what's going on in the Cuadrilla Inquiry in Blackpool. But during the break, take a look at this. This is from 38 Degrees. We played it a few times before. And thanks very much to 38 Degrees for giving permission to play this short video.
We've got some of the best agricultural land in the whole of West Lancashire.
Our land is our lifeblood.
It's a lovely place to live.
However, 15 months ago, Cuadrilla entered our lives and said that they want to put a frack site within 230 metres of people's homes.
Whatever's decided here will affect the rest of this country.
We know that this can be done safely and securely and in an environmentally responsible way, and we will do that.
That's exactly what the energy companies promised us in Australia too, but that's not what they delivered. They delivered destroyed land. They've left us with a toxic chemical nightmare, and that is what the industry brings to you. They came in, they took our land, they took our lives, and they destroyed our communities.
I'm on the front lines here in America. Most of us are on water wells, and now we have 10 townships that have families with contaminated water because of nearby gas drilling.
There was no one there to clarify and actually do an investigation to find out why the kids up the road, why their noses were bleeding all the time, why the woman up the road had rashes, why people's dogs started dying. We didn't know it was the gas making us sick, but what I do know is that we weren't sick before they came.
Cuadrilla are proposing to drill 4 exploratory wells for shale gas here.
The radiuses that have been quoted in scientific studies suggest that anything within a 5-mile radius will be affected by the air particles.
The licence that Cuadrilla have to operate will cover over 80% of the Fylde coast. And that basically means that you could have these well sites popping up everywhere.
What happens 10 years down the line? Cuadrilla will have got the gas, the government will have the money, and we'll be left without anyone doing anything about it.
A leaflet which Cuadrilla issue says fracking is safe. How the hell does he know? They don't know. Nobody knows. And they are prepared to risk our lives finding out.
Everywhere you look, communities are saying, stop it before it starts. Don't let it go ahead. Learn from what we've learned.
Not only have they fractured the land, they fractured the community.
Please, from someone who's lived it, I'm warning you, get up, stand up now, stop it.
We're guinea pigs for an experiment which we don't want to be part of.
We're just residents and I'm just a mum and I'm frightened to death.
And welcome back to part 2 of Fracking Nightmare. Now, for the last 3 weeks in Blackpool, at Blackpool Football Club, there's been the Cuadrilla Inquiry, where the independent planning inspector is hearing evidence from Cuadrilla, from Lancashire County Council, and from local residents and other interested parties. And of course, this is based upon Cuadrilla's appeal against Lancashire County Council's decision last June to reject their applications to drill and frack at both Rossiter and Preston New Road. Now, the inquiry is providing an absolute wealth of information, particularly for communities who will be facing the challenge of this industry in the coming years. It's a phenomenal resource, and it is with great thanks that I acknowledge Ruth Hayhurst's contribution. And I would encourage people to click on to Drill or Drop. This is screen grab from the Drill or Drop website. It's drillordrop.com. And please subscribe to this website because Ruth is giving almost blow-by-blow accounts of the discussions at the inquiry. And I would encourage other communities that are facing this challenge to save these posts, put them in a file, because they are covering every aspect of the planning application. And of course, there's cross-examination, so there's a phenomenal amount of detail, and Ruth is doing an absolutely outstanding job of covering this. And of course, this is the area that's concerned. This is the area just outside Blackpool. I mean, apart from the coastal towns and of course Blackpool as the resort, but the rest of the Fylde Peninsula is rural, just like the other areas being targeted in East Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, and Sussex and Surrey. And of course, not everybody is keen on this industry coming into town. And this is one of the examples of the signs outside people's houses as they let their displeasure be known. But right now, there are two frontline campaigns in the UK where the unconventional gas industry is attempting to progress. And the one that's perhaps most in the news at the moment is at Horse Hill, just 30 or so miles south of London, and just to the north of Gatwick Airport, and to the northwest of the village of Hawley. And as we reported last week, Stephen Sanderson, the chairman of UK Oil and Gas, has stated that they have a phenomenal flow rate. Initially, they got some 700 plus barrels per day from a 1-inch choke, and then having cut it back to half an inch, around about 430 barrels. And they're claiming that it was 90% light sweet crude. If David Lenegas had still been in the chair, I wouldn't have put it past David Lenegas to have trucked in a tanker load of light sweet crude from Kuwait and claimed that it had come out the ground there. But hopefully Stephen Sanderson wouldn't stoop to such depths. Stephen Sanderson stated that they're looking in the area of 700 to 1,000 metres below. So, of course, he stated that there's no way they would frack. Well, because the government, of course, has changed the definition of what is a hydraulic fracture. So right now, provided they pump less than 1,000 cubic metres of fluids in a single stage, or 10,000 cubic metres in the whole operation, and just to put that in perspective, in old money, 1,000 cubic metres is just shy of 220,000 gallons. So 10,000 cubic metres is just shy of 2.2 million gallons. So by definition, what occurred at Priest Hall in 2011, which triggered the seismic events there, then Francis Egan could have legitimately claimed, no, we didn't frack. So sadly, of course, what has occurred here is that the Infrastructure Act effectively gives the unconventional gas industry the equivalent of diplomatic immunity from declaring that they have fracked, provided they pump less than 1,000 or 10,000 cubic metres. So the industry certainly has to be scrutinised, and I think as we go through the planning stages, it has to be very, very clearly spelled out, exactly what, how much, and under what pressure, and where it is intended to be pumped. Now, if the people in the south of England think that this is just a single well site and it's going to be like Witch Farm, which it has been likened to in Dorset, I think they could be very much mistaken. And in fact, the Andrew Bell, who is the boss of Regency Mines, made this statement earlier in the week. He said, "This makes the south of England into Texas." So just consider what we were discussing a little while ago, where we were talking about the increase in road traffic, and I'm sure the industry will do everything it can to minimise the number of trucks. We've already seen United Utilities laying mains water lines, coincidentally adjacent to the prospective well site at Preston New Road in the Fylde. But nonetheless, the reality is that the number of truck movements would increase significantly, to say nothing, of course, of the fumes, the odours from the gases that are leached into the atmosphere, which is exactly what's occurring at Horse Hill right now, as we will discuss in a second. But nonetheless, the small investors are responding to the hype, and the ICOG stock, as you can see, since the middle of February, has gone from just about £1.25 pennies up to a peak yesterday of almost 3 pennies, and it closed today at 2.82. So that's basically, we're looking at an increase of more than 100%, which is not a bad return. But of course, you have to take into account that on the AIM, the commission taken by the brokers is 30%. So nonetheless, they're still looking at a 70% gain. Then, of course, there's the tax on that. But, hey, it's not too shabby at the moment. And I'm sure that Mr. Lenegas and many of his friends have done very, very well out of it. Now, the 35% owner of that well site is Magellan Petroleum. And they've benefited even more, perhaps, with the stock price being below 20 pence about a month ago. And below 0.2 of a penny, I should say. Below 0.2 of a penny, and now up to 1.155 pennies. So that's a pretty healthy return in the short term. Well, this is what it looks like from just outside the well site. My thanks to Jono, who was my guest last week, for these pictures. But when you get the camera over the fence and zoom in on the well site, this is a cowboy operation. I mean, this is unbelievable. And there is an outflow from this pad into a drainage ditch adjacent to this well site, which actually abuts right up to a livery right alongside. And the outflow has already leached some clearly polluted water, and samples are, of course, being taken. But they're not supposed to open the cock for that outflow whilst they're drilling, but of course they can when they've stopped. But the contamination is still there, and somehow that looks a little bit more than just rainwater. Now, are the Environment Agency monitoring this? Well, the Environment Agency were called out because of the concerns about the contamination in the outflow. And I have to say that the resident that called them was not impressed. They really didn't seem to be too concerned about the outflow. And when they saw the protectors walking by, they couldn't get their Environment Agency jackets off quick enough. Once again, it's another example of the fact that the regulatory bodies like the Environment Agency and the Health and Safety Executive, they don't have the resources, they don't have sufficient resource or perhaps even the expertise to monitor this embryonic industry. So what are they going to do if it actually takes off in a big way? Well, needless to say, the local residents are having their awareness raised. The protectors are there trying to exercise their right to peaceful protest. Unfortunately, the Surrey Constabulary seem to have somewhat different ideas. Although, before I make any comment about the Surrey Constabulary's handling of the peaceful protest, I will acknowledge the contribution made by an individual of the Surrey Constabulary last Saturday. Last Saturday, there was a solidarity event at Horse Hill. And sadly, a lady who had come up from Brighton, she collapsed. And had she collapsed anywhere else, it may well be that she perhaps wouldn't be with us. But a police officer, a Surrey Constabulary police officer, was on the scene within 90 seconds. Immediately, having established that she stopped breathing, he started CPR. Now, he maintained the CPR until the paramedics arrived about nearly 10 minutes later. They took over, and the fire brigade arrived because they are also trained paramedics. And the lady was given CPR for best part of an hour before she was breathing on her own and taken off to hospital. And although she is very poorly, I'm pleased to report that she is still with us. And certainly that is really, I think, as a direct result of the speedy reaction of the Surrey constabulary and the officer who was first on the scene. Unfortunately, that's about the only positive thing I have to say tonight about Surrey constabulary, because the task force there are not putting an inspector on the ground, and this is a deliberate policy because an inspector is classified as middle management, and therefore he is expected to be familiar with the guidelines that have been issued by ACPO, although ACPO, of course, now has been superseded, but the Association of Chief Police Officers had issued guidelines for policing and for arrests conducted at peaceful protest. And those guidelines effectively follow the guidelines that had previously been laid out by the Crown Prosecution Service, which state quite clearly that inconvenience, nuisance, and disruption are integral parts of peaceful protest, and that does not in of itself make them unlawful. Yet, despite those directives, and of course also the directives of the magistrates and judges that have heard numerous cases at Brighton following the Boreham campaign, and in Manchester following Barton Moss, and also in Cheshire at Upton, where the magistrates have upheld the guidelines, and where people have simply been slow walking the trucks in the road, that is not an obstruction because they're not stopped. If they stop and block the trucks, that's a different ball game. And you see here in this picture on screen, this is an example of a slow walk. Unfortunately, there have been other cases where Surrey Constabulary have perpetrated rather, how shall I say, arrests with excess force. That's probably a polite way to put it. The individuals concerned will no doubt ultimately have their charges dropped and be looking at a potential payout, a compensatory payout for the way in which they were treated. I doubt very much that any of these arrests will result in any charges, or if they do result in charges, I'm sure the cases will be dismissed fairly quickly. Well, the whole thing took a bit of a sinister turn, and we shouldn't really be surprised because, of course, there's a piece of legislation working its way through Parliament now, which is the Counter-Extremism Bill. And, of course, this is being presented as legislation to counter against the risk of Islamic extremism. But the way in which the bill is effectively worded would suggest that actually it could extend to anyone and everyone who has the audacity to challenge government policy. And this is of great concern. Now, earlier tonight on the episode of Humanity versus Insanity, we were discussing the forthcoming EU referendum and our considered opinion based on the research of other documents that the likelihood is that it's going to be fixed to bring Britain out of the EU. And in the ensuing period, then we're going to find a lot more freedoms dismantled in this country. So this counter-extremism bill is something that we have to be, I think, very, very concerned about, particularly if anyone is interested in the freedom of speech. Now, the reason this took a little bit of a sinister turn in terms of the Horse Hill protection campaign is because earlier this week there were 2 arrests, and upon the release of each of these arrestees, in amongst the documentation was this booklet. Here it is, First Steps, Promoting Emotional Health. And if we go to the inside of that book, we see that on page 7 is really the opening section of the book, What is Mental Health? And the opening paragraph makes this observation. It says, First Steps aims to help people find their way back to emotional well-being. The goal is to help people talk about and understand their emotions, thoughts and feelings, and make informed choices in addressing their mental health needs. Now, this should ring massive alarm bells because this is the tactics, of course, that were used in the Soviet Union and, of course, in East Germany to deal with any dissident. So anybody who has the audacity to challenge the political orthodoxy then runs the risk of actually being declared insane, forcibly medicated. Now, I appreciate this may have the effect of scaring some people away, but I'm reaching out to the 3% of people in this country that are committed to bringing about the changes that we all know we need to see. 96% of the people in this country, 96% of the people in the world, unfortunately, are locked into the matrix. And even if they have the inclination, they probably haven't got the time because they're focused on basically keeping the roof over their heads and keeping food on the table. But for the 3% of people, which is about 2 million people in the UK, there's 3% of people who are able to see what's occurring. They're able to see this totalitarian agenda coming down the tracks at a phenomenal rate of knots. And this is really a call to action for those people, because it doesn't necessarily mean you have to get on the front line and get yourself arrested and get one of these books. Not at all. There are other people who are certainly ready to do that on your behalf. But there are many other things that need to be done, not least, of course, the lobbying of local councillors, the lobbying of MPs, and when it comes to the unconventional gas industry, educating people and encouraging them to take a look at this for themselves. In fact, just last night, I was invited to meet with a group of residents in the Horse Hill area. And this was a standard spread of residents, including one individual who was ex-oil industry. And unsurprisingly, he was very defensive of the oil industry. His background was all in conventional oil production. And he'd been out of the industry for as long as I have. But clearly, he had not had the opportunity or perhaps the inclination to research the fundamental differences between the unconventional exploitation and conventional. Although he knew the theory, he hadn't looked at the practicalities. He hadn't looked at the magnitude of the contamination that this industry has caused wherever it has become established around the world. So it was a very interesting meeting. He certainly gave me a run for my money and kept me on my toes. But I think at the end of the evening, everyone around the table understood that this is an industry, the unconventional gas industry is not an industry that can be trusted. Their track record, whether it's Cuadrilla, whether it's Rathlin Energy, whether it's Third Energy, whether it's iGas, and now UK Oil and Gas, UCOG, it's absolutely imperative that they are scrutinised at every step of the way, and every claim they make is scrutinised. And their operations are scrutinised, and if they are breaching environmental or health and safety permits, then that needs to be brought into the public domain. Sadly, a lot of this information only comes to light after the submission of Freedom of Information requests. And of course, once again, the government is doing everything it possibly can to prevent the Freedom of Information requests being responded to. Meanwhile, there's another live site elsewhere in the country which has almost gone unnoticed. And this is in Loughton in Lincolnshire. And here we are, here's Loughton, there it is. So it is due south of Scunthorpe and to the east of Doncaster. And this is Egdon Resources, and they slipped in almost under the radar. That's their rig there. Fortunately, there are some people now monitoring the operation, but this is right on the edge of the Gainsborough Trough. So there is no way that this is purely an exploratory well into conventional geology. This will be going down to probably around about, I think about 9,000 feet, about 3,000 meters, and it will be taking core samples from the edge of the Gainsborough Trough. In fact, I think we got confirmation of this Here we go. This is the Loughton prospect. And it says here, the licence also contains additional prospects and shale gas potential to the south and east. So the residents of Lincolnshire need to really take a bit more interest in what's occurring here at Loughton. And the beauty of the rig being there, of course, is that, it does rather stand out. And it does give people an opportunity to develop some curiosity and find out exactly what's going on. Now, there are a few protectors there. And, the great thing about the protectors is that they are very well versed in this industry. So please take a trip down there if you live in Lincolnshire or South Yorkshire area. Go take a trip down there, go meet with the protectors, go ask them the questions. And if there's questions that you ask that they can't answer, they will certainly find the information out for you. Okay, so that's Loughton in Lincolnshire, 2 live sites, Horse Hill in Surrey, Loughton in Lincolnshire. So on that note, we'll take a short break. And in the break, we're going to look again at the trailer for a film that is due to be released within the next few weeks. It's called The Fracking Flame.
Fracking hasn't polluted water wells.
There has never been an indication of groundwater contamination from hydraulic fracturing.
There has never been any water ever contaminated from fracking.
No documented evidence of contamination of drinking water, ever.
Our team at UT Arlington, we've detected BTEX compounds, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene. Xylene, we've detected cyclohexane, we've detected chlorinated compounds. Dichloromethane, chloroform. We've detected these exogenous, which means they should not be in the water, constituents in Mr. Lipsky's water.
The local government in Texas tells Steve Lipsky that the water from his well, water that he can set on fire, is safe to drink and to use in his home.
Would you pump that into your house? Would you drink it?
This is the well from which he gets his water.
It'll go like that just as long as I leave it on.
That much methane is burning off in your water well.
Yeah.
How many of you lost your water supply? And there are many more.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a problem with EPA right now. I need you to come back and do your damn job and tell us the truth.
He's hooked that up to a gas vent.
Stunt.
They intentionally pump gas into the water line in order to set it on fire.
To deceive.
Deceptive video.
It was a fraud.
EPA scientists and engineers have looked extensively at a lot of data, and we're confident that Range is responsible for this natural gas in the drinking water aquifer, and we've ordered them to take the necessary steps to stop it.
I have way too much methane and other chemicals in my water, and the documents prove it here.
But we still don't have water.
And we still don't have water.
And welcome back to part 3 of Fracking Nightmare. Now, another live site, or what should potentially have been a live site by now, but fortunately isn't, is Misson, up on the border of Nottinghamshire and South Yorkshire. And earlier this week, it was announced by Nottinghamshire County Council that the consultation period on planning had been extended. And this is similar to what has been occurring in North Yorkshire, where the county councils are really starting to get themselves up to speed. And they're asking the right questions. And the gas industry is assuming that everything is as it was 5 or 6 years ago, when they could just provide scant information. There wasn't enough expertise on the local councils, and it was effectively just rubber stamped through, especially if you had somebody on the council who could champion it. But Nottinghamshire's County Council report here has agreed with Island Gas, iGas, to extend the time period for the determination of a planning application to carry out exploratory drilling for shale gas in North Nottinghamshire until July 29th. iGas is seeking planning permission to undertake exploration for shale gas on land off Springs Road to the northeast of Misson in Bassett Law, close to Nottinghamshire, Doncaster and North Lincolnshire local government boundary. More than 2,000 responses were received during the public consultation on the application, and the council has now written to iGas to seek further information on a range of matters, including site selection and sequential testing, surface runoff, ecology, traffic and transportation, and here's the kicker, unexploded ordnance, and landscape and visual impact. Apparently the site has a history of being used as a missile test range. So might be quite interesting if they drilled into some ancient ordnance there. So the people of Bassett Law, up around Misson, just to the east of Bawtry, have got a bit more time. So this is a great opportunity, obviously, for even more people in the area to be brought up to speed, so that when it gets to the next stage of the planning application, and once again, take a look at all the information that's being put out by Ruth Hayhurst on her absolutely amazing Drill or Drop website, because that is the information that you need to give you the insights of all the areas that need to be addressed by the local authority. And of course, we know that the British government is looking to do everything it possibly can to remove local authority participation from this process. So let's maximise this opportunity to make people aware. And then, of course, as we'll see in Blackpool, it's a win-win, because if the government ultimately support Lancashire County Council and reject the Cuadrilla application, that's a great result. On the other hand, as is more likely, they'll support Lancashire County Council on their decision for Rossiter and overrule them at Preston New Road. But it's a prima facie evidence that basically local democracy doesn't exist. And it's simply a charade and will be overruled. So it's really important that local communities get involved. Meanwhile, the iGas stock, sadly, it's not doing anything like the UCOG or Magellan stock, and it's still wallowing around about 16 pence here, which is exactly 1/10 of what it was in January of 2014. Meanwhile, of course, the price of oil is still vacillating either side of about $30 a barrel, closed tonight at 31.79. UCOG are claiming that they can be profitable at something around about $20 a barrel, so it's not a problem for them. But iGas have stated in their last financial report that they've got their operating costs down to a point where they can be profitable at just over $32 a barrel. Well, it's 31.79, so not profitable just yet. Well, the awareness campaign continues, and a few events coming up. Literally on Sunday. Yep, Sunday, the 28th February. This is for people in the Horse Hill area, in the Hawley area. And there'll be a number of speakers here. There'll be local speakers and also people from Balcombe, just a few miles south, of course, talking about their experience with Cuadrilla. But here's a great opportunity for people in the South Surrey area to go along and ask questions and educate themselves. Then Voices from the Gas Fields. It's been on YouTube now since the 1st of May of last year. I think even YouTube acknowledged that it's had something like 26,000 views, although it's a bit strange, really, because it had 6,000 in the first week. But hey-ho. Doesn't matter, does it? Because people can't unsee it. So this film is actually going to be shown this Saturday in Washington, just a few miles to the west of Horse Hill. And there will be also people from Frack Free Sussex and Frack Free Surrey to answer questions. And in fact, I will be at the same venue a week later on Saturday, the 5th of March, I believe it is, where I'll be talking about the bigger agenda, the unconventional gas, nuclear waste disposal, and also expressing some or sharing some insights into what I anticipate occurring in the aftermath of the June EU referendum. And I know there's a few other screenings, but we've got another episode of Fracking Nightmare before those screenings, so I'll save them for next week. Well, meanwhile, in Australia, and I'm hoping that next week I will have a guest from Queensland, a very special guest who will be talking about her experiences as a landowner in southern Queensland. And Queensland has been drilled and fracked extensively by a company called QGC, the Queensland Gas Company. It's QGC that have been responsible for the contamination that is now widespread across southern Queensland, contaminating the aquifers that feed a lot of this farmland, contaminating the soil, contaminating the air. Those of you who've seen Voices from the Gas Fields will have heard the experiences of the Monks and the Jenkins family, and will have seen the continuing contamination of the Contamination River, which feeds into the Murray-Darling system. So this feeds into the water supply for a lot of southeastern Australia. And here is a report from just 10 days ago in the Mail Online. The Australian river so polluted, it boils with methane gas and burns when you hold a match to the bubbling water. And it's fantastic that John Jenkin and John Reed Carew managed to get the attention of the Mail Online. Of course, it didn't get into the printed version, but get into the Mail Online to get this information out on a wider basis. Now, QGC was owned by BG Group, which is part of the breakup of British Gas. Now, BG Group is based in Reading in the south of England. But just a couple of weeks ago, the takeover of BG Group by Shell was confirmed. So they paid $35 billion for the BG Group. Now, Shell was smart enough to get rid of all of their downstream businesses in Australia. So although there still are some Shell gas stations in Australia, petrol stations in the UK, but although there are still some Shell gas stations in Australia, they are not owned by Shell. They've actually been sold out. They are franchised, and but they are permitted to retain the Shell logo. But in the UK, Shell still has a phenomenal downstream business. So here's an observation. Why do we purchase fuel from a Shell petrol station when Shell is now the perpetrator of a lot of this contamination? Of course, we know Shell has an abysmal environmental record, particularly in places like Nigeria. But now, we can perhaps start to hold Shell's feet to the fire. So the next time that you're driving along and you're looking at your fuel gauge and you need to fill up, consider whether you want to support and give revenue to a company that are now one of the major mother frackers on the planet. Because maybe you've got enough fuel to go a little bit further and get it from somewhere else. Ultimately, that is what forced Shell to change their corporate branding in Ireland. And that's why you don't see any Shell gas stations in Ireland. It's all Topaz. Of course, it is still Shell, but they had to rebrand. So, you know, hit the companies, hit the corporations where it hurts, right in the pocket. Meanwhile, in the UK, we've got 2 live well sites. If you're in the south of England or you're anywhere near Lincolnshire, please consider going and either supporting those camps in whatever way you can, or taking a trip down there, take a look at what's going on and educate yourself. Because collectively, we can stop this industry from establishing a foothold. Whatever their hype, at the end of the day, the one thing that you will never hear the industry or the government say is don't take my word for it. Please do your own research and come to your own determination as to whether this is an industry you want in yours or anyone else's backyard. Thanks very much for joining me tonight. The next episode of Fracking Nightmare will be on Monday, the 7th of March.